Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks so much for being with us. We begin this morning with the extreme weather continuing to sweep the country from coast to coast.
In the Northeast, torrential rains flooded streets, forcing millions to bring their 4th of July celebrations indoors. Lightning was also a major concern, injuring 2 people at Coney Island. Out west, the scorching temperatures are not relenting. Firefighters in Washington are battling a major fire in the western part of that state. A level 3 warning was issued, forcing dozens of residents to evacuate their homes immediately. At least 250 acres have been burned so far. It's not just in the west and the south. Millions remain under heat advisories this morning, prolonging an already record-breaking summer for high temperatures. United Nations officials are now warning it could be here to stay with El Niño's return to the U.S. All this severe weather is having a major impact on travelers who are looking to get home after a long holiday weekend filled with celebrations. All 3 New York City airports brought to a halt yesterday as those storms raged on. Let's get the latest on all these storms and the heat with meteorologist Michelle Grossman.
Yes, that means it's time for your morning News Now weather forecast. Hi, Michelle. Good morning.
Hey there, guys. Great to see you. And yeah, some travel home could be a little bit bumpy. We're looking at some road conditions that could be affected also in the air because we are unsettled once again today, watching the chance for severe storms. You can already see some storms on radar at this hour. We're looking at some storms in the middle of the country throughout Kansas, Missouri, and that will be the bullseye as we go throughout the rest of today. But also in the southeast, we're going to see those typical summer-like storms kind of popping up with that daytime heating. So we're going to be watching both those stories throughout the day, in addition to the heat. But we're seeing some lightning, hearing some thunder in portions of the Central Plains, some really heavy downpours too. That is part of the story, especially if you're traveling on the roadways. We're going to see some flooded roadways with these really heavy downpours. So 29 million people at risk for winds gusting over 60 miles per hour. Could see some hail as well, an isolated tornado or 2, especially where you see that yellow coloring. So Chicago, that's a big hub for the airlines. St. Louis, Little Rock, Tulsa, Amarillo, Dodge City, Denver. You could see some strong to severe storms as you head out through this afternoon and evening hours. Now, tomorrow, if you're still traveling, we're looking at that risk through Rapid City, Scottsbluff, Denver, Dodge City. So not moving all that far. We're still talking about the Central Plains, also the Rockies, and really the same scenario, winds gusting to 60 miles per hour. Very large hail and a few tornadoes are possible. Big rainfall amounts, we're looking anywhere from 2 to 3 inches, and we could see 2 inches per hour. So those very summer-like storms that drop a lot of rain in a short amount of times. Notice the Carolinas. We could see a lot of rain there, too. That's where you see those reds, the oranges, the yellows. But along the Gulf Coast states and the southeast, also in portions of the Central Plains, there's your flash flooding risk because we're expecting those heavy downpours extending from Green Bay back through the Rockies and also the southern parts of the Mid-Atlantic into the Carolinas. So the snapshot for today, we're talking about those severe storms, showers and humid in the southeast, the Carolinas, and then more record heat in the Pacific Northwest, also parts of the Southwest. We're looking at 29 million people impacted by heat alerts, whether it's a heat advisory or an excessive heat warning. Temperatures soaring once again into the triple digits. We're going to see record-breaking territories here once again. So Tucson, Phoenix, you're going to be hot. Portland and Medford, well above normal for this time of year. Look at Medford, 102. The record of 102 could certainly be tied, if not broken. Tucson, we're looking at 109 today. That's hot. 106 in El Paso. And we are hot, too, in the southeast along the Gulf Coast. That's going to help to aid some of the storms as we go throughout the afternoon and evening hours. So, guys, Tampa today, 96. That could be a record breaker as well. Back to you.
All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, we're learning more about the victims this morning from that mass shooting in Philadelphia over the holiday weekend. 5 people were killed, 2 others injured when police say a man wearing body armor opened fire in a neighborhood Monday night. NBC News correspondent George Solis has the latest.
The 40-year-old suspect due in court today. A number of charges are expected to be announced, including multiple murder charges, aggravated assault, and weapons charges. Officials say the shooter seemingly targeted victims at random in this Southwest Philadelphia neighborhood. They say the suspect was wearing a ski mask, had tactical gear on, had an AR-15 style rifle and handgun, and went into this neighborhood and frankly just unloaded as many as 50 rounds on people there. Among the injured, 2 twin toddlers, one of them being shot in the leg, the other receiving eye injuries from a result of shattered glass. Today, we are also learning more about the 5 victims killed, including a 15-year-old His mother speaking out, emotional, saying she demands justice, she demands accountability. Yesterday during a news conference, Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw calling the shooting abhorrent, but they are still searching for a motive. Investigators back out on the scene, trying to speak with witnesses, trying to find video. And speaking of video, police say a video from a traffic camera, now part of their investigation, that appears to show what may be the gunman in the neighborhood as they opened fire. Again, a lot of details to unlearn about this particular shooting. Yesterday, officials also noting that there was a second suspect that was apprehended at the scene. Officials saying that person was let go, as it does appear at this time that they were shooting at the suspect in what appears to be a case of self-defense. Today, we also expect to learn more about the shooting suspect. A name has been floating through social media, but officials say they will not be releasing it until the suspect is formally charged. So again, that arraignment expected to happen sometime this morning or later today. We'll bring you the details as they become available. Back to you.
All right, George, thank you very much.
Let's take a closer look at this with NBC News national security analyst Clint Watts. Clint, good morning. So in this Philly case, police say the suspect wore a bulletproof vest, also had a police scanner with him. Talk to us about the challenges officers face when you're trying to stop a suspect in a shooting like this. What is their strategy?
Yeah, it's so much different than what we would see 20 years ago. You're talking about shooters that are armed even to a greater degree than the actual law enforcement officers. They're wearing body armor, which the law enforcement officers usually are wearing, but sometimes they're not, especially if they're off duty. And then they have the communications of the officers as they're trying to, interdict and apprehend this individual. So it just puts them in a really tough position. At the same point, you're talking about a nighttime shooting, a moving shooting, as you could see just from some of the crime scene here, was over an extended, area of ground. You've got people that are obviously terrified, that are trying to defend themselves. It's such a challenging environment for law enforcement today compared to any other time in our nation's history.
And it wasn't just in Philly. It was really a deadly weekend across the country. Clint, I want to ask you about another shooting that happened. This one was in Fort Worth, Texas, Monday night. 3 people killed there, 8 others injured near a holiday gathering there. We know several victims were found in a parking lot, which is considered a soft target. So for police, what are the challenges they face with a shooting at such a big public gathering like the ones we saw over the 4th of July holiday?
Very consistent in recent years and unfortunate is how do you prepare in terms of your physical security for these sorts of events when you just don't know who the attacker would be. If you're looking at a vulnerability assessment, we can go all the way back to that very tragic Las Vegas shooting a few years ago. These situations are impossible to fully protect 100%. And then add to that, you don't know who the shooter is. When you look at that footage right there and you compare it to Philadelphia, that's 2 very similar scenes, nighttime, large gatherings. In the other place, we've got nighttime in probably a somewhat busy city street. It is very, very difficult for law enforcement if they don't have what we would say threat intelligence, if they don't preemptively know about a shooter, for them to think of every conceivable way or every conceivable target. It's just that difficult right now for law enforcement to stay ahead of these things.
And on that, it is summer. It's a time when people to get together in large events, whether it's outdoor concerts or parades or any sort of events like that. What's the best advice we can all get from you to remain vigilant when we're out and about in public, to stay safe, but also to enjoy some of the things that we want to enjoy this summer?
Well, the NYPD phrase, if you see something, say something, is always, critical in this. Just getting a tip, just a few seconds or minutes of a weird individual. Let's say in the case of Philadelphia, a random person showing up in body armor, walking down the street. Those tips, when reported, are invaluable when a response time of seconds can really result in many lives being saved. So I think, yes, obviously everyone should go and enjoy an event. They should feel good about their law enforcement, which are, very professional. But at the same point, every tip and lead they get, that just saves more and more time in terms of a response where they can get in front of these things before violence happens.
Clint Watts, appreciate your expertise. Thanks for joining us this morning. Turning to the Middle East now, Israel says it has ended its military assault on the Jenin refugee camp in the occupied West Bank.
As Israeli forces were pulling out of Jenin, militants in Gaza fired a volley of rockets toward Israel, which were all shot down. Israel then responded with airstrikes on Gaza. In Jenin this morning, Palestinians are emerging from their homes to survey the damage and destruction left behind. That's what you're seeing on your screen. At least 12 Palestinians were killed and more than 100 were injured in what Israel described as a counter-terrorism operation. A spokesperson for the UN Office of Humanitarian Affairs raised concerns over the camp's condition.
The airstrike also significantly damaged structures in which people were living, both in the camp and in surrounding areas. Due to damage to infrastructure, most of the Jenin camp is currently without drinking water, and the first initial estimation indicate that most of the camp is also without electricity. Health facilities have also reportedly sustained damage.
Joining us now to discuss is Dr. Shibli Telhami. He's the Anwar Sadat Professor for Peace and Development at the University of Maryland, also author of the book, The One State Reality, What is Israel-Palestine? Dr. Telhami, it's great to have you back with us again. Thank you for joining us. So as we heard there from the UN, there are these large concerns over the humanitarian situation in that camp right now. Obviously, the footage of the area does not look good. There's a lot that needs to happen probably before we even get to cleanup and reconstruction effort as this tension and violence continues. But what does usually happen in a situation like this in terms of who is going to go in there and help?
It's really always a disaster because there's not enough help that goes to those devastated, the civilians who get hurt, most of them, the thousands in this case, and maybe tens of thousands who get affected in general, because the Palestinian Authority, which has some autonomy and supposed to take care of the population there, is nearly bankrupt, is really incapable of addressing the issues that are at hand. And the Israeli Authority, which as an occupying power has a responsibility to protect civilians, obviously has been part of the problem in this particular case, is not going to try to help. A lot of the help will come sometimes from local organizations, NGOs, the municipality, which is also nearly bankrupt, but a lot of the international aid agencies, particularly the UNRWA, which has been an agency that's charged with helping Palestinian refugees over the years. That agency is under strain and might go bankrupt. It started really under the Trump administration when it withdrew the aid from UNRWA and put it on the brink of going out of business. Biden renewed some of that aid to UNRWA, but still it's in a big trouble. So there's, you've got all this devastation. I mean, even aside from dealing with the people who are homeless that you have to house and feed and take care of, you've got the infrastructure that's devastated, the water line, the sewage lines, the electric lines, the roads, the hundreds of homes that could have been affected by this. And so who's going to take care of that? And that's why, of course, you create a new generation of desperate people, young children who are watching all this and rendered homeless again and again. Remember, this is a layer upon layer of humanitarian disaster. The Palestinians are already under a military occupation for 56 years. What does that mean? We only look at it when the gun is fired. Mm-hmm. But when you have a military occupation, the gun is always present even when it's fired. And the whole environment every single day is tragic for people. So, yes, I think it's challenging.
Doctor, we know the U.S. is a major ally of Israel, but there's growing criticism over the amount of taxpayer money that's used to fund the Israeli military, which enforces the occupation. What are your thoughts on that? What kind of role should we see from the U.S., do you think?
Well, the United States, of course, has aided Israel no matter what happened. Anyway, aid to Israel, economic aid, the billions of dollars economic aid, the military technology that is given to Israel over anybody else. Obviously, most of the sophisticated arms that Israel has come from the U.S. That has been really independent from what Israel does. The U.S. could be critical of Israeli settlement building, for example, which are considered to be war crimes under international law. but there's been no tie-in between the aid and what Israel does on the ground. And that's why a lot of people have called, including us in this book that you mentioned, and a recent article that I wrote with colleagues in Foreign Affairs, we call the U.S. as enablers, and because essentially there are no consequences. So the far right in Israel is not going to be affected by words that are, given by a statement from the State Department when, in fact, aid goes as usual.
All right, Dr. Telhami, thanks for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Well, tomorrow, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is scheduled to begin a major visit to China to meet with senior officials. The visit, which will focus on economic and financial issues, comes less than a month after Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to the country, which you probably remember. Professor Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S. Tech War, joins us now with an in-depth analysis on Secretary Yellen's visit. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. So tell us first just what we know about main objectives here. I know that we're not necessarily expecting any major breakthroughs, but what is the purpose for this visit to Beijing?
From the Biden administration, it really is just to reestablish communications with China. Those communications, of course, have been eroded because China has broken off a number of these channels, and the Biden administration wants to put them back together. So they are downplaying expectations of substantive results. This is really talking about talking.
How much do you think this visit, as well as that visit I just referenced a second ago last month from Secretary Blinken, will do anything in terms of resetting the relationship between the U.S. and China? Is there hope for that?
This is really up to China, whether they want to have communications with us or not. And our sending senior officials, I think, actually makes life more difficult for the U.S. because China has been engaged in very belligerent hostile activities, and it should be the Chinese trying to mend relations, not us. You know, we think that we're responsible by trying to talk, but the Chinese see it as a vassal coming to the Chinese capital, acknowledging subordination. And so this is just feeding their already inflated sense of self-importance. I don't think it's working. And we have seen over the course of decades, it hasn't worked. China's moving in the wrong directions, and we've got to do something different.
This also might be a stumbling block. It's something that you actually just tweeted about earlier this week. I want to read part of this. You said, China's direct and continuous support of Russia's war effort in Ukraine makes the CCP regime complicit in the barbaric acts of the Russian forces. Clearly here, the U.S. and China are on different sides of this war, is essentially, at the root of this. What impact does that have on these discussions, on hopes of sort of repairing a relationship here, and on these diplomatic trips as they unfold?
The Biden administration has put a lot of effort to getting China to back away from its support of Russia. And I think it's had some effect. I think China would be providing more assistance if it weren't for the efforts of Washington. But we know that the Chinese have been supplying, for instance, lethal aid. We keep on warning about it, and we don't actually impose the sanctions on China for doing something that the Chinese know that we know they're doing. So I think that we need to start imposing some costs, because if we do that, then China will see the Biden administration is actually serious.
Gordon Chang, thank you very much. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.